Johnny Carson was television's unshakable king. For 30 years, nothing rattled him. Not celebrity meltdowns, technical disasters, or personal struggles. He was the master of composure, smoothing over any moment with perfectly timed jokes. But on March 15, 1987, everything changed. During a commercial break, Johnny received a phone call that shattered his world in 7 seconds. What you didn't know, what 15 million viewers never saw, was how he learned his best friend had died moments before going live. What happened next shocked his crew so deeply that some refused to speak about it for years. The way Johnny finished that show revealed true courage nobody expected. March 15, 1987. Studio 6B at NBC Burbank buzzed with the familiar pre-show energy that had become as routine as Johnny's monologue itself. The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, was television's most reliable clockwork, 30 years of seamless entertainment delivered with Swiss precision. Every weeknight at 11:35 p.m. Eastern, 15 million Americans settled into their living rooms knowing exactly what to expect. Johnny's opening jokes, celebrity banter, and that reassuring smile that said everything was right with the world. The studio atmosphere that Tuesday evening felt identical to any other taping. Stage manager Shirley Wood called out cues while cameramen positioned themselves for the opening shot. The band tuned instruments as Doc Severinsen adjusted his famously flamboyant outfit. Ed McMahon sat at his desk, reviewing notes and chuckling at Johnny's planned zingers. The audience of 240 filled the bleacher seats, their excitement palpable as warm-up comedian prepared them for television magic. Johnny Carson had built his entire career on predictability wrapped in spontaneity. Viewers trusted him implicitly because in 3 decades he had never let them down. Through presidential scandals, natural disasters, and national tragedies, Johnny remained their constant. The steady voice who could find humor without crossing lines, who could comfort without preaching. His professionalism was legendary among NBC staff. Directors knew Johnny would hit every mark, nail every timing, and rescue any segment that went sideways. The show's format was sacred: monologue, guest segments, musical performances, maybe a comedy sketch. Johnny controlled every element with masterful precision, ad-libbing when necessary, but never losing command. Even during his most personal moments, his divorces, his son's death, his mother's passing, Johnny maintained professional boundaries. He might reference personal struggles in his monologue, but always with distance, always with control. That's why what happened during the 5:52 p.m. commercial break was so unprecedented. For the first time in his storied career, Johnny Carson's private world collided violently with his public persona. The phone call that shattered his composure came from his oldest friend's widow, delivering news that would test every principle Johnny held about separating personal pain from professional responsibility. America was about to witness their beloved host face an impossible choice. At exactly 5:52 p.m. during the first commercial break following Johnny's monologue, production assistant Jenny Martinez approached the host's desk with unusual urgency. Johnny had just delivered his trademark golf swing pantomime to cap off jokes about Congress, and the audience was still laughing as cameras pulled back for the 2-minute commercial window. "Mr. Carson, there's an emergency call," Jenny whispered, extending the beige telephone receiver with trembling hands. Her face had drained of color, and seasoned crew members later recalled they'd never seen her look so shaken. Johnny glanced up from his index cards, eyebrows raised with mild curiosity rather than concern. Emergency calls during tapings were typically network executives with last-minute guest changes or advertisers with scheduling conflicts. Johnny pressed the receiver to his ear while Ed McMahon chatted with the audience, keeping them entertained during the break. "This is Johnny," he said in his familiar, confident tone. The voice on the other end belonged to Margaret Tibet, widow of his college roommate and best man, David Tibet, the man who had introduced Johnny to his first wife, who had been godfather to Johnny's sons, who had shared every major moment of Johnny's rise to stardom. "Johnny, David is gone," Margaret sobbed. "Heart attack. This morning. I've been trying to reach you for hours." The change in Johnny's expression was instantaneous and devastating. Cameramen positioning equipment for the next segment noticed his face transform from practiced television charm to raw shock. His signature smile vanished. His shoulders sagged. The index card slipped from his fingers, scattering across the desk's burgundy surface. Sound engineer Mike Zanola watched from the booth as Johnny gripped the phone with white knuckles, his other hand covering his eyes. "When?" Johnny asked, his voice barely audible over the studio's ambient noise. "How?" The questions came in fragments, each one revealing the depth of his disbelief. 90 seconds remained in the commercial break. Director Bobby Quinn began signaling for positions while Johnny sat frozen, processing news that David, his best friend for 43 years, the man he'd spoken with just last weekend about fishing plans, was dead. The studio clock ticked toward live television, and America's most composed entertainer faced an impossible decision: abandon the show or perform through devastating grief. The commercial break ended in 15 seconds. Bobby Quinn raised his hand, counting down as Johnny sat motionless, the phone still pressed against his ear. Margaret's sobs echoed through the receiver, while 15 million viewers waited for their nightly dose of Carson magic. Ed McMahon glanced over, sensing something was catastrophically wrong, but unsure whether to intervene. 5, 4, 3. Quinn's fingers dropped as the red camera light blazed to life. What happened next defied every rule of television professionalism. Instead of his trademark smooth transition, Johnny looked directly into camera one with eyes that had filled with tears. His voice, usually rich with confidence, cracked as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just learned that my dearest friend has passed away." The studio fell silent. Not the planned quiet of a dramatic pause, but the stunned hush of 240 people witnessing something unprecedented. Audience members leaned forward, unsure if this was part of an elaborate sketch. Cameramen froze, uncertain whether to keep rolling. Even Ed McMahon, master of quick recoveries, sat speechless. Johnny's hands shook visibly as he placed the phone receiver in its cradle. His carefully styled hair had become disheveled when he'd run his fingers through it during the call. The makeup that usually gave him a polished glow couldn't hide the pallor that had washed over his features. For 30 years, viewers had seen Johnny Carson, the performer. Now they were seeing John William Carson, the man. David Tibet was... Johnny paused, struggling to find words that could encompass 4 decades of friendship. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the audience to strain forward. "He was the brother I chose." Stage manager Shirley Wood stood frozen at her position, her clipboard hanging limp at her side. The teleprompter operator had stopped scrolling, unsure what script could possibly follow this moment. In the control booth, network executives watched in horror and fascination as their most valuable star abandoned every protocol they'd established. Johnny's next words would shock his crew so deeply that some would refuse interviews about this night for decades. The choice he made, to continue or collapse, would reveal the true character of America's beloved host in ways no scripted moment ever could. Johnny straightened in his chair, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and made a decision that stunned everyone watching. Instead of calling cut or taking a break, he looked directly at his audience, both in the studio and at home, and did something he'd never done before. He chose radical honesty over entertainment. "David taught me that friendship isn't about the good times," Johnny said, his voice gaining strength with each word. It's about showing up when everything falls apart. He showed up for me through 2 divorces, through losing my son Rick, through every stupid mistake I made in 30 years of show business. The audience sat transfixed. This wasn't the polished vulnerability of a Sweeps Week special or a calculated moment designed for Emmy consideration. This was raw human grief shared with millions of strangers who suddenly felt like intimate friends. Johnny's authenticity created an unprecedented connection that transcended the television screen. Ed McMahon, fighting back his own tears, leaned forward and simply said, "He sounds like he was a good man, Johnny." It was perfect. No jokes, no attempts to lighten the mood, just one friend acknowledging another's loss. The simplicity of the moment made it profound. "The best," Johnny replied, then did something that shocked his crew beyond words. He smiled. Not his practiced television smile, but a genuine expression of love and gratitude. You know what David would say if he saw me crying on national television? He'd say, "Johnny, you're being dramatic again. Tell them about the time I beat you at poker for 3 straight hours." The audience laughed, not because it was funny, but because Johnny had given them permission to find joy alongside sorrow. He had shown them that grief and love could coexist, that honoring someone's memory didn't require perpetual sadness. In that moment, Johnny Carson transformed from America's entertainer to America's friend. He had invited 15 million viewers into his most vulnerable moment, and in doing so, had created a bond deeper than any comedy bit ever could. The studio crew watched in amazement as their boss, the king of controlled performance, chose authentic emotion over professional distance, forever changing what television could be. The immediate aftermath of Johnny's raw honesty created waves that rippled through Studio 6B like nothing the veteran crew had ever witnessed. During the next commercial break, audience members remained completely silent. No shuffling, no whispered conversations, no requests for bathroom breaks. They seemed to understand they had witnessed something sacred, a moment when the artificial barriers of television had dissolved entirely. Backstage, the show's planned guests, comedian Robin Williams and actress Sally Field, watched monitors in stunned silence. Williams, known for his manic energy and inability to sit still, stood motionless as Johnny continued the show with a tenderness that redefined everything they thought they knew about live television. Field later described the experience as watching someone's heart break and heal simultaneously on camera. The Tonight Show's switchboard lit up immediately. NBC operator Linda Chen fielded hundreds of calls within minutes. Not complaints about the disrupted format, but viewers wanting to share their own stories of loss and friendship. People weren't calling to criticize, Chen remembered years later. They were calling to say thank you. They felt less alone. Johnny's decision to continue the show while honoring David's memory created an entirely new template for authentic television. Instead of hiding his grief, he wove it into every interaction. When Robin Williams finally took the guest chair, Johnny asked him to share a story about friendship rather than promote his latest film. Williams, reading the room perfectly, told a gentle story about his father instead of launching into his usual rapid-fire routine. The show's ratings that night broke records, but more importantly, viewer mail over the following weeks revealed something unprecedented. Thousands of letters poured in from people sharing their own stories of loss, friendship, and the courage to be vulnerable. Johnny had accidentally created what psychologists would later call parasocial healing, a mass therapeutic experience through shared emotion. Network executives initially panicked about the show going off format, quickly realized they had witnessed television history. The unscripted segment would be studied in journalism schools for decades as an example of authentic broadcasting's power to create genuine human connection across vast distances. Johnny had proven that sometimes the most professional thing you can do is abandon professionalism entirely. What the audience never knew was that David Tibet wasn't just Johnny's best friend. He was the man who had saved Johnny's career and possibly his life during the darkest period of his journey to television stardom. In 1962, when Johnny was struggling as a game show host in New York, drinking heavily and convinced he'd never make it in television, David had made a phone call that changed everything. David worked as a talent coordinator at NBC and had quietly been advocating for Johnny behind closed doors for months. When Jack Paar announced his departure from The Tonight Show, David fought fierce internal battles to get Johnny's name on the short list of potential replacements. Network executives favored established names like Joey Bishop or Groucho Marx, viewing Johnny as too risky, too Midwestern, too unknown. David literally staked his own career on me, Johnny had confided to his son Chris years later. He told the NBC brass that if they gave me 6 months and I failed, he'd resign. Nobody else believed in me that much. Not even me. The friendship ran deeper than professional advocacy. When Johnny's son Rick died in a car accident in 1991, David had flown to Los Angeles within hours, not to offer condolences, but to simply sit in Johnny's living room for 3 days, without saying a word. When Johnny's marriages fell apart, David never judged or offered advice. He just showed up with a bottle of scotch and listened. Their bond was forged in shared Nebraska roots and sustained by absolute loyalty. David understood Johnny's complicated relationship with fame, his struggles with intimacy, and his deep fear of being seen as ordinary. While others saw the polished television star, David saw John William Carson from Norfolk, Nebraska, the shy kid who used magic tricks to connect with people because genuine emotion felt too dangerous. The irony wasn't lost on those who knew them both. Johnny's most authentic television moment came while grieving the man who had taught him that authenticity was more powerful than performance. David's final gift to his friend was the courage to drop every mask and show America his real heart. In choosing vulnerability over protection, Johnny honored the very lesson David had been teaching him for 43 years. Johnny Carson's choice to share his grief instead of hiding it revealed profound truths about human connection that extend far beyond television studios. In that moment of devastating loss, he demonstrated that our most powerful connections happen not when we're strong, but when we're broken and brave enough to let others witness our brokenness. The lesson David Tibet had taught Johnny, and that Johnny passed on to millions that night, was revolutionary in its simplicity. Authentic relationships require authentic emotions. For decades, Johnny had built his career on the premise that audiences wanted him to be on constantly, delivering polished entertainment that kept messy human realities at bay. But when forced to choose between performance and truth, he discovered that vulnerability creates deeper bonds than perfection ever could. This principle applies universally to every relationship in our lives. We often believe we must hide our struggles to maintain professional credibility, romantic appeal, or social acceptance. Johnny's experience proves the opposite. People connect with our humanity, not our highlights. When we share our real selves, including our pain, fears, and imperfections, we give others permission to do the same, creating the foundation for genuine intimacy. The courage Johnny displayed wasn't about having no fear. It was about feeling the fear of vulnerability and choosing connection anyway. He could have easily taken a break, composed himself, and returned with his usual polished persona. Instead, he chose the scarier path of letting 15 million strangers see him as he truly was in his darkest moment. His decision also illuminated the difference between burden sharing and connection building. Johnny didn't dump his emotions on the audience or make them responsible for his healing. Instead, he shared his experience in a way that honored both his grief and their humanity, creating space for collective processing rather than individual therapy. Perhaps most importantly, Johnny demonstrated that leadership, whether on television or in daily life, sometimes means showing others how to be human. By modeling emotional courage, he gave his audience permission to grieve openly, love deeply, and face their own losses with dignity rather than denial. True strength isn't the absence of vulnerability. It's vulnerability in service of love. 3 decades after that extraordinary evening, Johnny Carson's moment of raw vulnerability continues to resonate in ways that transcend entertainment history. In our current era of curated social media personas and corporate speak authenticity, his choice to share genuine grief on live television stands as a masterclass in what real human connection looks like when the stakes are highest. Modern leaders across every industry study that March 15th broadcast as a blueprint for authentic communication during crisis. Business schools analyze how Johnny's vulnerability actually strengthened rather than weakened his authority, demonstrating that admitting our humanity doesn't diminish our credibility, it enhances it. His example has influenced everyone from CEOs navigating company tragedies to politicians addressing national crises, proving that genuine emotion resonates more powerfully than scripted responses. The entertainment industry itself was forever changed by Johnny's decision. Today's late-night hosts, from Jimmy Fallon to Stephen Colbert, regularly incorporate personal vulnerability into their shows, understanding that audiences crave authentic connection over polished performance. The rigid boundaries between entertainer and human being that dominated television for decades began dissolving that night, paving the way for more honest, relatable broadcasting. Mental health professionals cite Johnny's broadcast as a turning point in how Americans process grief publicly. Before that evening, showing emotion on television was largely reserved for dramatic performances or carefully orchestrated moments. Johnny proved that sharing authentic feelings doesn't require apology or explanation. It simply requires courage. Perhaps most significantly, his legacy lives on in the countless individuals who choose vulnerability over self-protection in their own relationships. Letters still arrive at NBC from viewers who credit Johnny's example with giving them permission to grieve openly, love more deeply, or share their struggles instead of suffering alone. In an age where authenticity is often performed rather than felt, Johnny Carson's spontaneous moment of genuine emotion remains a beacon of what's possible when we choose connection over control. His friend David Tibet's death created a moment of television history that continues teaching the world that our greatest strength lies not in our ability to hide our pain, but in our courage to share our love. That March evening in 1987, Johnny Carson proved that our most profound moments of leadership happen not when we have everything together, but when we choose love over fear in our most broken moments. By honoring David Tebbett's memory with honesty instead of hiding behind professional facades, Johnny transformed a devastating personal loss into a gift of connection for millions of Americans who needed permission to grieve, to feel, and to be authentically human. The lesson David taught Johnny, that showing up means being real, not perfect, echoes through every relationship we'll ever have. When we face our own moments of loss, heartbreak, or overwhelming emotion, we have the same choice Johnny faced: retreat into self-protection or step forward into authentic connection. His example reminds us that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the birthplace of genuine intimacy and a lasting impact. Johnny's courage that night created ripples that continue expanding today. Every time someone chooses to share their real struggle instead of pretending everything's fine, they honor the legacy of that extraordinary broadcast. Every leader who admits uncertainty, every friend who shows up in crisis, every person who loves openly despite the risk of loss, They're all carrying forward the wisdom Johnny and David embodied. As we navigate our own friendships, careers, and moments of crisis, we can ask ourselves the question that guided Johnny's most authentic moment. What would love do? Not perfect love, not performed love, but the messy, imperfect, courageous love that shows up exactly as it is and trusts others to do the same. David Tibet's greatest gift to his best friend became Johnny's greatest gift to the world. The reminder that our humanity isn't something to overcome, but something to courageously share. In a world that often rewards masks over authenticity, their friendship stands as proof that our deepest connections happen when we're brave enough to let others see us as we truly are, broken, healing, and beautifully human.